Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unravel a truly incredible story. How a single company, based thousands of miles away, came to rule one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. We're diving deep into the colonial era in India.
Okay, take a look at this painting from 1778. This is more than just a piece of art. It's basically propaganda. See how the figure representing the East is shown just offering its riches to Britannia, who's the symbol of Great Britain? This single image perfectly sets the stage for our story. It's a story of how immense wealth was transferred, how power was seized, and how an empire was built.
And this image leads us right to our central question. Seriously, how did a private company of traders manage to conquer a vast and powerful subcontinent? It's a story that's as fascinating as it is complex, so let's start to unpack it. But before we can zero in on India, we need to understand the bigger picture. What was this powerful idea that was driving European nations across the oceans during this time?
It all comes down to colonialism. Now, this is more than just conquering land. It's about one country completely taking over and imposing its own political, economic, and cultural systems on another. And yeah, empires have existed for thousands of years, but the age of colonialism that kicked off in the 15th century was something else. It was a global expansion by European powers, all fueled by this fierce competition for wealth and resources.
So, why India? Out of all the places in the world, what made this specific region such a coveted prize for these expanding European powers? The answer, in one word, is wealth.
This number is just staggering. Before the colonial era really got going, India wasn't a developing nation. It was an economic superpower. It was producing an estimated 25% of the entire world's manufactured goods. Let that sink in.
And this economic might was built on goods the rest of the world was desperate to get its hands on. We're talking about legendary spices, incredibly fine cotton textiles, precious gems, and even a type of high-quality steel. India had really sophisticated manufacturing and vast trading networks that stretched across the globe long before Europeans showed up in large numbers.
The discovery of a direct sea route to India by the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama in 1498 was a total game-changer. It bypassed the old land routes and kicked off this frantic race. The Portuguese, the English, the French, the Dutch, you name it, they all wanted a piece of the incredibly lucrative Indian trade. Now, this is where the story takes a really dramatic turn. We're going to see how one of these trading companies, the English East India Company, morphed from just a business into a powerful, dominant ruler.
You know, the secret to the East India Company's success was that it was no ordinary business. A royal charter from the Queen of England gave it these incredible powers. It could mint its own money, it could declare war, and, crucially, it had its own private army. A company with an army. Think about that for a second.
And you better believe it used that army. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 was a pivotal moment. The company's victory here wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about gaining real political power and the right to collect taxes in the incredibly wealthy region of Bengal. This was the moment they shifted from trade to pure dominion.
See, the takeover of India wasn't some single big invasion. No, it was a slow, very strategic process that happened over decades. It would start with a trading post. Then, the company would start taking sides in fights between local Indian princes. They'd back a winner, install a ruler who owed them, and just slowly expand their influence until, boom, they could take over a territory completely.
And the British didn't just use military force. They also used some pretty clever legal tactics. A perfect example is the doctrine of lapse. This policy said that if an Indian ruler died without a natural male heir, their kingdom would just be taken over by the British. This completely ignored the Indian tradition of adopting a successor. It was basically a legal excuse to just annex territory.
So, the company grew from a tiny trading post to a continental power. But what did this all mean for the people of India? What was the actual impact of British rule on the ground?
This quote from a British Governor-General himself is just haunting. It paints such a brutal picture of the human cost of British economic policies. This isn't just about numbers and trade figures, it's about the total devastation of entire communities and their livelihoods.
At the very heart of British economic policy was a concept that historians call the drain of wealth. This wasn't a fair trade relationship, not at all. It was a systematic, one-way transfer of money, resources, and goods from India straight to Britain, which in turn helped to fund Britain's own industrial revolution.
This slide really shows the fundamental shift. Before the British took full control,
India was a global manufacturing hub, but British policies turned this completely on its head. They taxed Indian textiles so heavily, they basically disappeared, while at the same time flooding the market with cheap British cloth. So India was transformed from a producer of finished goods into a supplier of raw materials for British factories and a captive market for British products.
And this chart, well, it brilliantly illustrates the result. Just look at these numbers. From producing a quarter of the world's wealth to just 5% by the time of independence, that is a staggering economic collapse. It shows how one of the world's richest countries was systematically made one of its poorest.
And the changes weren't just economic. The British dismantled traditional systems of local government, things like village councils, and they replaced them with a centralized administration that was really just focused on collecting taxes efficiently. They imposed a foreign legal system, and, maybe most ironically, they made Indians pay, through taxes, for the very administration and army that was ruling over them.
So this all leads us to the final part of our story. How did the people of India react to all of these changes? And what is the lasting legacy of British rule?
Because of its incredible wealth and strategic importance, India became known as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. It was, by far, their most valuable and most important colony, really the linchpin of their entire global power structure.
But colonial rule was never just passively accepted. Resistance existed right from the start. A massive uprising in 1857 was a huge turning point. And even though it was ultimately suppressed, it was so widespread that it led to the end of the East India Company's rule. The British Crown then took direct control, which started the period known as the British Raj. That just means British rule in Hindi. This event also planted the seeds for the organized freedom struggle that would eventually win India its independence.
The legacy of this period is incredibly complex. It left India with a shattered economy, but also with new systems of administration and law. The British built railways and telegraphs, but not for public welfare. It was mostly to move troops and raw materials more effectively for them. But, paradoxically, this infrastructure also helped to unify the subcontinent, laying the groundwork for a modern, independent India.
And that brings us to our final thought. This isn't just dusty history. The economic relationships, the political boundaries, and the cultural dynamics that were established during the colonial era continue to have a profound impact on our world today, shaping everything from global trade to international politics. It's a legacy we are all still living with.